Welcome to the poshest hotel in Oxford, the Randolph, now taken over and modernised by Graduate Hotels. It's only just reopened after the revamp. It's much more modern and even more stylish than before. It's probably even more expensive now. The tourists are slowly coming back to Oxford, many because they know Oxford from the nearly 100 two-hour TV films on Morse and Endeavour. The last series has just finished, and a little secret for you, a new one is planned for 2022. This wonderful little book has been launched here tonight. It's my baby, but could not have been born without the midwifery of Julian Costi's publisher. Over to you, Julian.
John, thank you very much. We're Bite-Sized Books, and welcome. We have an audience here, and we have a larger audience online. Bite-Sized Books was created 7 years ago by the founder, who's in the room with us here. You can't see live on television, but Dr. Paul Davis. And he created this concept of bite-sized, shorter books that lend themselves peculiarly well to many of the books that John has introduced. We've got about 100 books so far, 200 authors, and the difference between 100 and 200 is that, rather like the Morse book, it's made up of a number of contributors, not just a single author like some of our other books. The book, of course, is edited, and you're going to meet a number of the guests this evening who are contributors to the book. John himself is a former senior BBC producer, an eminent BBC person who not only is moved on to producing an incredible number of books. He's done 20 books with us, and sadly a number with rival publishers as well, but we'll let him go on that. He's also the person who created this concept of hackademic, which he's coined as an expression meaning books which are brilliant for the authors because they are dealing with very topical issues of the time, not so great for the publishers because they're extremely ephemeral, but we can forgive him for that. Welcome everybody to the event this evening, and a particular thank you to Graduate Hotels, to the management of Randolph, who have been incredibly supportive and have been the sponsors of the room and our drinks this evening. So thank you, John.
Okay, right. Thank you, Julian. If you'd like to resume your place, we've got a series of those in the know tonight, coming to talk about Morse and Oxford and much, much more for a few minutes each. This is much more than a guidebook. It's got lots and lots of other things in it. There's got 2 or 3 academic articles for those of you who love footnotes. First off, Heidi Boone, who'd here to join us, who's the doyen of the Oxford Tour Guides. Check out her walking tours of Oxford site. It's very good. She's provided the meat and the veg for the tour for this book. Heidi, take us on a journey.
Thank you, John. I've been doing this job for 10 years now. I'm a qualified green badge guide for the City of Oxford, and it's something that I love. Often after a tour is completed, I've been asked if there is a book available, perhaps as a souvenir or just to remember the tour. So this winter, as the United Kingdom was once again plunged into staying at home, it became my lockdown labour of love. I was then approached by John, and the book was then launched. So today we're going to take a short journey through Oxford to discover some of the locations used in the film, and we'll start right here at the Randolph Hotel. The Randolph started life 150 years ago and was here as a need for top-class accommodation for the proposed visit of the Prince and Princess of Wales some 2 years later. It's now, as John has mentioned, owned by Graduate Hotels, and I'm delighted that the Morse Spa has survived. I think Colin would be too. In the Morse episode, The War of the Coat Tongue, we see a group of Americans arrive here in Oxford. The coach pulls up to the front of the Randolph. They get off, they check in, and one by one, the bodies begin to pile up. Sheila is their tour guide, and if you recall, she's very partial to her gin and tonics. In Lewis, Allegory of Love, it's based around an author, Dorian Gray, and he has his book launch right here at the Randolph. How appropriate. To the best of my knowledge, Endeavour have not used it, although I have a recollection of a scene outside where they renamed it for some reason the Rudolph Hotel. It wasn't Christmas. From here, we'd cross over to the Martyrs Memorial, which is where our popular Morse, Lewis and Endeavour tours start from. And then we're going to turn around to the Broad Street, which is used frequently in all the episodes. For example, in Twilights of the Gods, we have a Welsh opera singer, Gladys. Morse takes a bit of a fancy to her. But let's face it, she's female, she's an opera singer, and she's got a pulse. She's shot a little bit further down Broad Street. Lewis used it frequently. And for example, in Down Among the Fearful, Lewis and Hathaway have a car crash outside the Blackwell's art and poster store. Hathaway gets whiplash and spends the entire episode in a neck brace. For Endeavour, let us travel to Trove. There's a beauty pageant being held along Broad Street, and a protester gets up onto the float and shoots a gun. There's red everywhere, but it turns out that it's paint rather than blood. Finally, we'll walk around Cat Street, passing the iconic British size on the left-hand side. No trip to Oxford would be complete without a cheeky little selfie here. Time and again, the bridge of sizing used is Morse, Lewis and Endeavour, really too many to mention. And then on to Radcliffe Square. Dominating the square is the Radcliffe camera, and on the far end, the University Church of St. Mary the Virgin. It was here that Hathaway plays the guitar in the Lewis episode, Old School Ties.
Just to interrupt you a second, just to explain, the viewers at home could actually see a map of Morseland, so they're able to follow this. I'm sorry you can't.
We then travel around the square and up Brasenose Lane, where we'll hit Turl Street. Turl Street, you'll find the location of 3 colleges. We have Lincoln College, Jesus College, and importantly, Exeter College, founded in 1314. Exeter College is probably one of the most used colleges for the filming of Morse, Lewis and Endeavour. For example, at the most recent Endeavour, Striker, the one with the football player, a scene was filmed in the front quad. But to learn more about Exeter and many of these locations, do join us on our award-winning Morse, Lewis and Endeavour tours. I couldn't do my job without Elizabeth, who's here tonight, my go-to guide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Thank you for your work on John House wants to give you a round of applause. Please do. Cara, you want to come and join us? Morse is dead, and so too is Colin Dexter. I mean, the takings at the Morse bar have gone down since he died, but he's been replaced in the canon of Oxford detectives by D.I. Adam Fawley. Cara Hunter is a North Oxford author, has sold over 1 million copies of her books by D.I. Fawley. She's been published in 25 countries. He is the new Morse. Cara, tell us about Fawley.
Well, I'm sure, as a lot of us know, there's been a lot of crime, especially in Oxford over the years, certainly going a long way back. But if you're a crime writer like me, trying to write about this city, then it's very much a case of how do you solve a problem like Morse? Because there's definitely a whole sort of era when Morse came along. So it's BC and AD. It's before Colin and after Dexter. And unfortunately, I'm AD, so I had to find a way of working around that. But let's say right up front, I've always been the most massive Morse fan, read most of the books, and I absolutely adored the TV. And when it came out, as I'm sure we can all remember, even though it was 35 years ago, thank you for reminding us how old we all are. I remember they were absolutely groundbreaking, weren't they, at the time? No one was making TV like that. The sort of 2-hour format was completely new, and they just blew me away. And they do hold up really well, even now. If you watch them again now on cable or ITV3 or whatever, they still hold up really well as pieces of television and pieces of storytelling and characterization. Even though now, of course, there are some where you have to have a little bit more suspension of disbelief because forensics has moved on so much, and certain stories would have actually come to a screeching halt in 10 minutes now because, there's DNA, we can find out exactly who the father was, that sort of thing. And I suppose also for me, I always, because I was at university here as well, which is just before the Morse started coming out, I always felt it was quite a nostalgic view of the city as well, quite a chocolate boxy one in the nicest way, but I can see why for TV purposes you would do that. And also, of course, for anyone who's ever had any connection with our real police investigations work, then the connection with a Morse investigation is at best tangential, shall we say.
We can actually see your map of Fawley.
Yes, I'm coming.
Right, here we are.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. Yes, so when I first started thinking about writing a set of, starting with one book that then became a series of books set in Oxford, crime books,
The first thing I did was think, well, actually, I can't set it in Oxford at all. I mean, literally, there's just too much already been done with this city. Everybody must be Oxforded out by now. So the first version of my first book actually had the city very thinly disguised, as it turned out, as a place called Kingstead, for Charles I being the having his headquarters here in the Civil War. So Kingstead, King's Place. Only my Penguin editor managed to see through that in approximately 3 nanoseconds. Um, so I'm definitely not a master of disguise. So she said straight away, turn it back into Oxford. So I did. But that again brought its own challenges, because since I was in Oxford now, the shadow of Morse, if you like, was even stronger. So my own books evolved a bit in the early days, almost in opposition to Morse, not being like Morse. So my central character is married. He's not grumpy. He doesn't particularly like classical music. He drives a Ford. And as he says in the first book, and I don't do bloody crosswords either. So that was the original inspiration for Adam. He wasn't Morse. And also, as John says, I don't concentrate on the centre of the city, the things that Heidi's just been talking about and which we see again and again so beautifully done in the TV. My own Oxford is very much the outskirts of the city, so the communities that ring the town. And that's where I find interesting overlaps of communities, tensions arise, stories come from tension, as we all know. So that was my deliberate decision, and also to avoid the university wherever possible. I have some stories with some involvement in the university, but mostly I try to keep away from it because it's been done really well already. And the last one is that point I just made about, as it were, the reality effect of doing a crime story set in this town. I don't have the same sort of format. It's not 2 detectives. It's very much a team effort. And I spend a hell of a lot of time with a real DI going through police procedure, making sure I get it right, even if it comes to the point where he says, I can't arrest them at the end of the scene, even though that would be really dramatic. I have to arrest them at the beginning of the scene because that's what would happen in real life. So from my point of view, it's a very different sort of Oxford from the one that we see on Morse. It's a bit edgier. It's a bit darker. But the halo effect of Morse is still with us. I mean, we're all here for a start. But I find it in the books as well, because one of the reasons, as John just mentioned, I've got books translated in 25 different languages. One of the main reasons is that everyone knows Oxford, and everyone knows Oxford because everyone knows Morse. So that's a huge thank you to Colin from me, because that gift is still giving. And I have a tiny little homage and thank you in my own books, where I've got a female detective whose name is Summer, Somer. You don't need to be a crossword puzzle fanatic to know that that's an anagram. Thank you very much.
Don't spear Cara.
Oh, sorry.
Some of Cara's books are outside by
They are, yes.
and she'll sign them. They're only £6 each, about 3 or 4 of them. Why are your books so popular?
Ooh. You can't ask and what.
You've sold 1 million copies, for God's sake.
Yeah, well, Oxford's very popular. People love crime. Crime is particularly popular in lockdown, I think. I mean, it's popular anyway. I think lockdown, a lot of people turn to crime because, I suspect, because it's a universe in which answers have to be given. Real life often doesn't give you answers, but someone famously said, the difference between life and fiction is that fiction has to make sense. Life doesn't have to make sense. And I think during lockdown, a lot of people found their lives weren't making sense and wanted something that would give them some stability and a world where things were a bit more certain. So I think recently crime's been popular for that reason.
But you're going to become telly as well, aren't you?
Hopefully, yes. We've sold the TV rights, but we're still talking about networks at the moment. So we don't know exactly whether it will happen or not, but we hope so.
So when can we expect to see Fawley on?
Well, the earliest would be a couple of years, I would imagine, from here. So
Are as popular as Morse?
who knows? Fingers crossed. I hope there'll be a Fawley tour one day. Who knows?
And the next Fawley book?
Hope to Die, July next year.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Now, for a fictional DI to a real one, Dermot, come and join us. Dermot Norwich was actually a DI in Oxford around about the same time as Morse, so maybe a few years later.
Well, yeah, from about 1986.
Yeah, so a real one operating here. Now, tell us, was Morse good copper?
He was a dogged police officer. He was an old-fashioned police officer. He was somebody that wanted to get the result. He was committed to the task, and I think that in actual fact, he at times went off at a tangent and had to pull himself back during the course of the investigation. So he was a police officer, a detective of some note, but he was old-fashioned in his approach. He followed his nose. He was rather like a bloodhound. He'd follow the clues and get a result at the end of the day. That couldn't happen nowadays, as you've just heard. There are certain police procedures with murders. There's incident rooms. We all work as a team. It would be very unlikely for a DI or a DCI, who would be a senior investigating officer, to in actual fact go out and meet witnesses or offenders. They would be the managers, the organisation of the inquiry. They would be responsible for fueling a machine called the Holmes computer, which is a major incident computer, which then would detail what inquiries should be made, and they'd be tasked to usually a detective sergeant, a detective constable.
Were they going twos, as Morse did?
Yes.
Still.
And a DI or DCI would have a bagman, which would be a detective sergeant, who was the main workhorse of the CID office.
Just like Lewis and Morse.
That's right. Yes.
And when you were a copper, did you read and watch Morse?
Yes, I did. Well, when I first went to Oxford, it was 1986. I transferred from the Force Fraud Squad to Oxford CID General Office. When I arrived there, everybody was talking about the series being made, about the filming that was going on, about the cooperation that senior officers gave the cast and gave the crew. They gave them access to documents, headed Thames Valley Police forms, and they also allowed the filming certain aspects of Morse leaving the St Aldate's police station in his Jag through one of the now gone sort of exits of the car park. So there was a lot of enthusiasm for it. And most certainly during the course that I was in the Oxford CID office, people would actually be talking about the series, talking about the programs which had been aired. And then during the course of several years, you would hear classical music being played from various offices. Officers took an interest in classical music, believe it or not. And you'd often hear people humming the Morse theme down the corridor. So it took on a great sort of enthusiastic sort of listeners and viewers.
When you came to drink here on a Friday night, what was the phrase you'd use?
Well, what we used to do was go for a Morse moment, which would come up to the Randolph on the day before a long weekend, and we'd drink in the Morse bar. Or if we went out in the town on a social, we'd tour several pubs, usually around the college areas, the ones that Morse went to, the White Horse, the Turf, etc., and we'd call it a Morse moment as well.
But you must have watched some of it and thought, this is complete rubbish.
Well, it's entertainment, isn't it? It's good entertainment. I enjoyed it. There were aspects of Morse which I could see reflected in certain CID officers I knew when I first joined the police force in 1970. Yes, visiting pubs was expected of CID officers. There was a drinking culture as such in CID offices.
Did you buy drinks for your DS? Did you pay?
Oh yes, certainly.
Morse never did.
I know, but that was he was a different creature, was he? he was slightly brought up at a different time to me,
Right.
And I think that in actual fact, what he did, there was a distance between him and Lewis, wasn't there?
No, I mean Dexter didn't go into police station till novel 5.
No.
Does that show? Do you think?
Well, it does, because I met Colin Dexter. I worked with him on a Radio Oxford program and he admitted to me that he didn't know anything about police procedures or how investigations were made. He didn't know anything of that at all. But I think he made wonderful stories. He created wonderful stories, and it was good viewing and it was good reading.
Now, him and John Thor used to come and drink in the police central.
They did, yes.
Didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
What sort of reaction did they have there?
Well, everybody was sort of, overwhelmed a little bit. We had these very important guests, and the cast and the crew and John Thor, they came, and Colin Dexter, and they enjoyed a convivial evening. And my DI at the time rubbed up shoulders against John Thor and said, "Now you're playing me," which was quite comical if you'd have known who the DI was.
He didn't have an Oxford education.
No, not at all. Not at all. No.
Now,
He didn't do crosswords either. But
what difference do you think Morse has made to Oxford Police and Oxford Police?
what difference has he made? I think the difference he made.
Has he given him a higher profile? I mean,
Oh yes,
was
certainly as a profile. I mean, in the Scenes of Crime office at the new modern police station, they had a cardboard cutout of John Thor dressed as Morse, and they would say, "This is," put a sign on the window saying, "This is Inspector Morse's office." And we also had a similar cutout, which we used to, on our CID dinners every year, we used to take with us, and he used to sit at the end of the table. So he was always with. So it did have an impact upon the CID office in Oxford.
And there is a blue plaque there, isn't there? Somewhere.
Yes,
I'm sure Peter Noro put up.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Has that had much? Do people knock on the door, do you think, and say,
It's the policing has changed awful since I retired in 2003.
yeah,
You'll be very, very lucky to get the police station open now. I mean, it does close early. It's not a 24-hour station anymore.
if you were advising Carl, if you were writing Morse now, what would you change?
Don't think I'd change anything, to be honest with you.
How would you bring it up to date, though?
Well, he'd have to be a more methodical investigator, conforming to the procedures such as major incident rooms, working as a manager rather than an investigative detective, because that's what that rank does. DIs do.
So shoe leather? No, not so much shoe.
No, not so much shoe leather. A lot more.
All else here.
The one thing you don't see in Morse is a lot of paperwork, do you?
Right.
There is no statement taken. Everything seems to sort of get done, and it's there. Whereas in reality, it takes an awful long time to get a prosecution file together if you're investigating a murder and you've got an offender in court.
So DNA profiling,
That's right.
all the
modern things.
all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Morse conducted investigations similar to what they investigated probably in the 40s and 30s.
Yes.
He was a bloodhound, followed his nose. That's where it took him. And if it took him down the wrong track, you'd have to backtrack. Whereas in a modern investigation, everything is your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted, and it's as more.
Did you ever meet any Morses in the police force?
Did ever meet any Morses? There are similarities in his character. There, people, officers of his rank that were not married, that were dedicated. If you go on about Fred Thursday in Endeavour, I certainly worked with detective inspectors of that nature.
Peter Norroyd is in this book, the former chief constable, who some of you may know, who was a Morse figure. I'll just read, he can't be here tonight, but I'll read you a bit from him. He says, fictional or not, Morse has been a real presence for many British police forces, especially if you happen to be an Oxford-educated police officer with a love for classics. I did classics in history of art, which is the college, and then modern history at Oxford. I could empathise with Morse and his experience of the antipathy displayed by some of his on-screen colleagues, because Morse liked opera and was far too clever. I can vividly remember, as a young constable, being rudely awakened in the middle of the night by a detective chief superintendent bursting into my section house with the encouraging words, "You're a bloody bright bastard, I need you now." He wanted someone to read through 700 pages of statements to sort out the key actions for double homicide. It could have been from Endeavour. And when I became a detective superintendent and found myself handling a particularly difficult multiple murder, I overheard one of the detective constables tell his partner, "And look what we got, Morse and bloody Lewis." The latter was a reference to my deputy, SIO, who was neither a Geordie nor in any other way like Kevin Whately, the loyal sidekick, other than being a first-time detective. Either way, Morse and Lewis appeared to be very much alive to these detectives. Do you remember Peter Neroyd when he was...
I remember he was the chief constable, yes.
Was he good?
He was chief constable. I was a detective inspector.
Stop being polite.
I met him on he invited me for coffee when I retired, on my retirement day.
Yes.
And he encouraged me to write a book about my time in the police force, which I've never done. I can't say what he was like really, because it's such a void between a rank even of an inspector and a chief constable.
But was he well regarded or was he regarded as a bit of a top?
He was regarded as an academic chief constable who wore boots when he was on duty. that was the most sort of common sort of remark that you'd have made.
He never quoted classics at you. He did to some Hampshire policemen when he was there.
No,
he never quoted Virgil.
No. I mean, I've met him since, and he's a completely different man to what he was when I met him as a chief constable.
Peter Nora and I teachers at Cambridge.
Yeah, that's right.
So what was, if he'd come into the CID office in Oxford, started spouting Virgil and Latin, how do you think you guys would have reacted?
I think we'd have switched off. but plus the fact, if a chief constable comes into a station, you'll find it quite empty.
Dermot, thank you very much indeed. Dear MC. All right. Now, Morse TV may be centred on Oxford itself, but the programmes and novels look way beyond Oxford. Remember, the first Dexter book was The Last Bus to Woodstock, and a lot of them are around there. John Howson, please come and join us. John is chairman of the county council in Oxfordshire, and went to university with me, but we all have our crossings to bear.
I'm not sure whether that's your cross or my cross.
How do you see Morse's influence in the county?
Well, it's very good to be here tonight and to take us outside of Oxfordshire, because tourism in Oxfordshire is really important. And it's worth remembering that I don't think there's anything in the book about the fact that Morse strayed outside Oxford on a number of occasions. There's a scene in Burford where, in The Remorseful Day, John Barron falls to his death from a ladder. That's probably the furthest west, I think, that Morse got. But Blenheim Palace, and particularly the Coombe sawmill, features in The Way Through the Woods. And that gives Morse a chance to drive up to that wonderful facade at Blenheim Palace. And the Oxford Canal appears a couple of times, particularly around Thrupp. And for those of you who haven't been to Thrupp recently, it's a jolly good place to walk to along the canal. 2 pubs there. It takes about a couple of hours, 2.5 hours, so a good place to go for Sunday lunch, and then you can catch the bus back. I have to say, earlier this year, I managed to walk from Oxford to Banbury for my charities as chair of the county council. That's a bit longer. The other place that features, of course, outside of Oxford, in the Wolvercote Ton, is the Didcot Railway Centre, and indeed Didcot Parkway Station. And then there are a few places that aren't in the centre of Oxford, which are actually technically in Oxford, but I think I can probably claim them for this segment. So it's the Vicky Arms in Marston, and of course the Trout in Wolvercote. So there are these areas outside of the centre of Oxford that we're grateful to Morse for putting on the map, and I hope that we will be able to encourage, through experiencing Oxfordshire, people to build them into their tours of the county, to see the many other wonderful sites there are in this county.
Yes, but you closed down the tourist office in Broad Street.
Well, the tourist office, I think, was run by the city council, not the county council. And of course, there's an awful lot that you can do online these days, much more cost effectively than necessarily having an expensive shop front in the centre of Oxford. I think we probably, my view would be that if we weren't so strapped for cash, and virtually all the money the county council spends goes on social care, we would have some sort of engagement. But then we don't, like most countries, have a tourist tax. If we had a tourist tax, then we could fund better tourist facilities, both in the city and the county. I think the good news is, certainly for the city, that there are now far more hotel beds than there were a few years ago. Not all of them welcome. The Easy Hotel in my division in Summertown, not entirely welcomed by all my residents, but I'm sure it will be a useful addition, like the Premier Inns and travel lodges that we now have dotted around the city.
What difference does Morse and the TV make to Oxford and Oxfordshire, do you think?
I think it helped put it on the map, particularly for the Americans in a context of people who were not interested in architecture or academia. It gave them another reason to come to Oxford. I mean, my great regret, I think, is that too many people come to Oxford on coach tours, and they're going on to Stratford or Bath or somewhere else, and they're just dropping through. They don't spend much money here. They don't get a chance to really appreciate the city. I think we have to find a way, now we've got these extra hotel beds, of encouraging both those sort of tourists and the tourists who are parents of our undergraduates in the city, who come up for matriculation, who come up for graduation, who come up for all sorts of other things. Come and spend some money. They are a good asset to us and a good asset to our tourist trade.
Now, I floated this idea of a Morse code around the city, where you actually have a series of little plaques so people can follow the Morse trail. What do you think of that?
That's a jolly good idea. We can put them on lampposts, and we can have QR codes, which most people understand, and then they can actually get the information onto their mobile phones. There's an awful lot of old stuff, not just planning notices, littering around notice boards. But even I came across today in my division a bus timetable from 2006, which is still there. And I challenge anybody to tell me where it is.
Give up. Where is it?
It's in Bardwell Road, just before you get to the Dragon. And it celebrates the bus that used to go from Summertown to Abingdon via Jericho and Templar Square. So that was a long while ago. But actually, I think we'll probably list it in a few years' time.
So with the tourists coming back, which they will, what message have you got for both the county and the city in terms of Morse tourism?
I think we need to, not only Morse, but all the other, whether it's Dorothy L. Sayers, Philip Pullman, or the many other authors, Zuleika Dobson, the 19th century poets, and so on, to encourage people that there is a lot of good tourism reasons for coming to Oxford. At the start of the lockdown, I said to the, and you'll remember this, I said to many of the shopkeepers in Jericho that I was really surprised that we weren't marketing Jericho as the hidden quarter. And I hope that when these, racks of things to do in Oxford appear in our hotels, eventually there will be one to come and visit Jericho, Oxford's hidden quarter, Morse and Pullman and many other things to see, and go for a walk along the canal.
It's still hidden.
Still hidden. Still far too hidden. Well worth discovering.
It is. Go to the Harcourt Arms. John, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John.
That's right. Well, I'm going to rant for a minute. Oxford, as said, doesn't take Morse and Morse tourism seriously enough. Think of Stratford without Shakespeare. Think of Bath without Jane Austen. Think of Broadstairs with Dickens. Look for the Morse plaques around Oxford. How many do you think there are? There are 3, or maybe it's 2. There's one on the police station, one on the railway station, and I'm told that one of the Vicky Arms in Marston maybe has disappeared. So that is all the Morse things there is here. We really does need to be a Morse code, a series of plaques or whatever, which show tourists where they can find Morse buy the book as well. That's got wonderful, wonderful maps in it as where to go. So time for the Morse code. Chris Andrews, come on up. Chris Andrews is Mr. Tourism in Oxford. You sell thousands and thousands of postcards and lots of books to tourists in Oxford.
We've actually sold 20 million postcards so far.
All right, thank you.
1 million books, 500,000 calendars. And
I
think
stand corrected.
it's very, very important. I mean, not only does it create an income, but it encourages. But I heard some very good news today about encouraging people into Oxford. There's been some doubt about vaccines and such like. I don't know if you've heard this, but apparently Woolworths is going to reopen here, and there's going to be no problem about which vaccine you'd like. It's prick and mix.
Who wrote the lines?
You kindly asked me about the impact of, recently you asked me about the impact of Morse and Oxford and the importance of it. The importance is not only of these numbers of things that are sold, but things like your books and mine and all other books they have an immediate effect. They create an income, not only for those that are producing them, but for those that sell them. It creates economy into Oxford. More importantly, it encourages others to come because they don't just sit there and they're read and thrown away. They are talked about amongst other people. So every book, your Morse book, will be talked about. Every book, your book. Every book's my books, my cards, the calendars. They will spread. These numbers will be the biggest attractor of people back to Oxford to regenerate the city. And I think that we should be very pleased that you produced this book and your ideas of those Morse plaques or tours. Morse code, I beg your pardon, is excellent.
So if Susan Brown was to come to you and say, Chris, you know tourism in Oxford, what do I need to do to get people?
Give me a grant.
Oh, well,
Would be nice.
That's obvious, but what else? Because Oxford's not very good at this.
Well, the guides are excellent.
Yeah.
Guides spread the word amongst people. The guiding is, I think that people know immediately. If you want to come to Oxford and know something about it, the Guild of Guides and others are absolutely excellent. The shops are, those that are still open, are very good. You know, they are individual shops. They do encourage people. They want to come not just for tourists and things, but for the sheer quality that's here as well. Susan Brown, who is she?
She's the leader of the council.
Okay. I beg your pardon, not very council-y.
Chairman of the county and leader of the council.
Support us. Support the people who are making things like this. Support them. Look at what they need and say, look, how can you help us attract more people in and attract that income back and spread the word of how good Oxford is? I mean, the place was started in 700, 800. The university started 800 years ago. There is immense history here.
How do you therefore get the Americans back here, the Chinese baback here, into Morseland?
Well, believe me, they want to come. I mean, we have a huge mail order database now. And the biggest message I've been getting over the last 3 or 4 months is, Chris, we love your stuff. We are so looking forward to coming back. We're so looking forward to coming and seeing Oxford. That interest is pent up and it will come.
So will you sponsor a Morse code tour?
No, I think the council should.
Well, okay. But you think...
I don't have any money to sponsor anything.
But you think it's probably a good idea in terms of...
I do.
Everyday tourists?
Yes, anything that encourages people in and educates them a bit, rather than walking around not understanding.
Aimlessly, should we say?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But if anything that gives information and encourages the viewer, it's going to do that thing I banged on about earlier. It's going to encourage conversation. They're going to go back and say, I had a wonderful time and I learned this, and you can do it too.
Difference do you think Morse has made to Oxford as a city and indeed tourism product?
It has certainly raised its profile on those who do not know the longer history of the city. It's raised the city's profile in terms of, television obviously is a huge
200 hours of free advertising, essentially.
Sounds great to me.
Well, that's what it was. It's 100 times 2. Yeah. 200 hours free advertising on network TV.
Perfect.
Plus America.
Very important book.
Right. So there's this book. You had a quick glance at it. Will you be selling it through your many outlets?
That depends if you can agree at terms that suit. But yes. I should love to.
Very good. All right. we're coming towards the end of this little program, this little event. Time to call it a day. And what's been sort of, I think you might agree, a most enjoyable, fascinating hour. The book, by the way, is fascinating as well. Here it is. It's available on Amazon at $14.99. It's a cracking read. It's multi-layered. It's not just a guide. It's much, much more than that. It has academia. It has literary analysis. It has lots in it. Let's leave with some nice pictures of the most famous hotel in Oxford, now back in business. Over to the Randolph. And thank you all for coming.